The rotation assignment came through on a Tuesday, which was the day the Academy used for paperwork errors and scheduling anomalies. I had learned to watch Tuesdays. Tuesdays were when things happened to me that were not supposed to happen to anyone. The assignment read, Intake Cadet Marin, Jade/Vosketh Predator Handling Annex, /Primary Specimen Rotation, /0600. I read it twice. Then I checked the number on my intake chit to confirm I was, in fact, Marin J, and not someone else who had wandered into my bunk and left their datapad behind. The number matched. I was Marin J. I was assigned to the Predator Annex. I had scored 41st out of 43 in the intake assessment battery, which was the kind of placement that usually earned you a rotation in supply inventory, not Apex specimen management. I reported at 0600 anyway. Nobody had told me not to. Handler-Warden Ossrel-Vaun was already in the corridor when I arrived. He was tall in the way that Velketh are tall, not height exactly, but a vertical compression of presence, like something that had decided upward was the direction worth occupying. His gill filaments ran from below the jaw to mid-clavicle, and they moved the way flags move, constantly, reading the air. I had been briefed on Velketh in the intake packet. They tasted chemical output. Fear had a signature. Anticipatory stress had a different one. There was a whole register of emotional states that Ossrel-Vaun could read off a room the way I could read weather off a sky. He looked at me when I entered. The filaments stilled for a half-second, then resumed their slow movement. Intake, he said. His standard was clean, institutional, no warmth in it. You are here because the rotation system produces errors, and I have been informed errors are not my administrative concern. You are my administrative concern. He turned to address the full cohort, 8 cadets arranged in a loose semicircle at the far end of the corridor. Rule. One rule. Nothing in that pen survives contact. You do not touch the specimen. You do not approach the specimen's enclosure boundary. You observe from the marked line and you do not cross it. If the specimen approaches the line, you step back. If the specimen breaches the line, you move to the emergency alcoves and you do not come out until I tell you. Questions. It was not inflected as a question. Nobody asked one. The pen was through the inner door. I had expected something like a tank, reinforced transparasteel, controlled salinity, the kind of setup you might build for a large aquatic animal. What I had not expected was how large. The chamber was 40 meters across, the floor depressed 2 meters below corridor level, and the holding pool occupied most of it. The water was black, not murky. Black, actively light-absorbing, the color of the deep channel water off the southern shelf back home where the pressure changes, and the fish that live there have never seen sunlight. I had pulled nets in water that color. Different ocean. Same dark. The Vethardak surfaced once while Ossrel-Vaun walked us through the observation protocols. It was big. The sensor fronds along its lateral line caught the chamber's ambient light and threw it back in a dull bioluminescent wash, green-white, and then it submerged again and left nothing but a slow circle of displaced water. One of the cadets behind me made a sound I chose not to classify. 11 handlers in 30 years, Ossrel-Vaun said. 7 of those were transferred after the first contact attempt. The remaining 4 are in the institution's medical records. The specimen is not aggressive. It is territorial about the water column above its primary rest site, and its sensory fronds trigger a contact defense response when something of sufficient mass enters that column. You do not enter the water. You do not extend anything into the water. You stand at the line. The Vethardak came up again. It was looking at us, or doing whatever it did that functioned as looking, the fronds fanning wide, tasting the chemical output of 8 cadets at the observation line. I watched Ossrel-Vaun's gill filaments while it did. They moved steadily, reading the same air. 7 different registers coming off the cohort, probably. Fear and anticipatory stress, and the tight chemical signature of people who were working very hard to look like they weren't afraid. I was thinking about the time I spent 4 hours in a survival suit, clinging to a net winch housing, while the boat went through a Force 7 crossing. Not the same as this. Not the same animal, but the same basic fact. Something large and indifferent to whether I lived, and the only useful thing being to not make the situation worse with my own chemistry. The session was uneventful. We observed. We stepped back once when the Vethardak cruised the enclosure boundary. We did not cross the line. Ossrel-Vaun logged the session and dismissed us at 0900. The Veth came out of the water on the third day. It happened fast. The way things at sea happen fast. Not a warning, just a new condition you were now inside of. The specimen breached the enclosure lip with one lateral surge, the kind of movement that doesn't look physically possible until you've seen it, and then it was on the chamber floor, 600 kilos of territorial aquatic predator, draining water in every direction, the sensor fronds fully deployed and reading the room. The cohort went for the emergency alcoves. That was the correct response. Ossrel-Vaun had told us exactly where they were and exactly what to do, and 6 cadets did it without hesitation, which was good training working the way good training is supposed to work. I was at the wrong end of the chamber. Not through any error of positioning, I had been where I was supposed to be, but the Veth had come out on my side, between me and the alcoves, and it was now 7 meters away, and its fronds were spread wide, and its mass was oriented toward me with the particular quality of attention that large animals give to things they have not categorized yet. I stood still. This was not a decision exactly. It was more that standing still was the thing my body had learned to do in the presence of something that would react to sudden movement. Learned it over years of working around machinery and animals and open water in conditions where panicking cost more than it bought. I stood still, and I breathed at the rate I could sustain without effort, and I let my hands hang. The Veth fronds moved, tasting. The problem, I would learn this from Ossrel-Vaun's notation later, was the fronds themselves. They had been partially matted by the transition from water to air. The sensory organ that the animal used to read its environment was compromised. Matted fronds produced signal distortion. A Veth with matted fronds was an animal that could not properly read what was in front of it, and an animal that cannot read what is in front of it escalates to contact defense. I didn't know that at the time. What I knew was that the animal looked uncomfortable. I had seen that look before, mostly on animals much smaller, but the underlying expression, the restless quality of something that can't get clear information about its own surroundings, was recognizable. I had seen it in confused livestock in a storm, and I had seen it in fish too long in the net. The fronds were matted and the animal was getting noise instead of signal, and it was about to do something decisive, because decisive was what you did when you couldn't read the room. I took off my jacket, not quickly. Slowly, the way you do things around animals. Deliberate, no sudden extension of limbs. I folded it once, then I walked forward. Ossrel-Vaun said something from the alcove access. I didn't parse it. The Veth held its position. The fronds tracked me, getting noise. I got close enough that I could feel the water still running off its lateral mass, cold and faintly saline, and I reached out with the folded jacket and began working the fronds free, starting at the proximal end where they attached to the body, and moving outward. The same motion you'd use on anything matted. Not pulling, separating, letting the frond find its own alignment. The animal was very still. I worked for about 4 minutes. The fronds came clear section by section, and each time a section cleared, I felt the animal's mass settle slightly. The tension going out of it, the way tension goes out of something that is finally getting good information. By the time I reached the distal fronds, the Veth had lowered its head until the leading frond cluster was resting on the chamber floor, which Ossrel-Vaun told me later was the species' resting posture. The animal stayed there while I finished. Then I stepped back and it went back into the water. The chamber was very quiet after that. I looked down at my jacket. It was soaked through and covered in whatever biological compound the fronds secreted when deployed, something between seawater and lanolin, with a smell I didn't have a word for. I looked at Ossrel-Vaun. He had come out of the alcove access and was standing at the chamber's midline. His gill filaments were fully extended and absolutely motionless, which I had not seen before. "You entered contact range," he said. The fronds were matted. The filaments moved once, a slow oscillation, and stopped again. He was reading something off me that he didn't have a category for, I could tell, the same way the Veth had been getting noise instead of signal. 30 years, he said. In 30 years, no handler has made unassisted frond contact with a primary specimen in distress. I thought about the net winch housing and the Force 7 crossing, and all the years between then and now that had taught me what composure was worth and what panic cost. The fronds were matted, I said again. It couldn't read the room. I could. Ossrel-Vaun was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his kit and produced a clean handling cloth and held it out to me. "Your jacket," he said. I looked down at the jacket. Soaked, compound-covered, structurally compromised. "I'll need a dry one," I said. "That one's done." The filaments moved. I was not certain, but I thought that was the first time I had seen a Velketh laugh.